Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens.
Diddy may have been acquitted of some pretty big charges at his criminal trial, but he still was convicted of 2. So what's next for him in terms of sentencing, his finances, facing a wave of lawsuits, including a brand new one from a former exotic dancer who claims...
The courtroom was tense from the start, but the atmosphere grew almost unbearable when Sean Diddy Combs was finally made to face his fate. Every seat was taken, the media buzzed with energy, and spectators leaned forward in anticipation, as if the entire room was holding its breath in the heavy silence that lingered before the judge spoke.
Combs' criminal trial. The question now is, what is next for him, right? You got sentencing, civil suits, a lot to get into. So while Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking charges that he was facing, he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Currently, sentencing is set for October 3rd. However, there is a hearing set for July 8th where the defense will be arguing for the sentencing date to be expedited to happen sooner. Obviously, they want that, considering Combs was also denied bail yet again, despite arguments from his legal counsel after the verdict that he should be released on bond. It didn't happen. They want to make sure that this happens as quickly as possible. But what will he be sentenced to, really? That's the question. And also, will the government seize his assets? What about all of those civil lawsuits that he faces? Again, a lot of questions, a lot to get into. So for all of this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I got to say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for RICO for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in the dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to. Right, they don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event, so he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If the case was, if they had called, let's say, Christina Korb, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. Do you think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony, I mean, Sean Combs still paying her rent, messages that she was setting up a lot of these sexual encounters. Cassie had messages too that were problematic that showed if we're talking about whether she was a willing participant or not. But if you focus just on Cassie and you didn't call in Jane, or you didn't call in a Mia, or you didn't call in a Brianna Bengolan, if you limited the case, and now it's so easy to play, Monday morning quarterback or armchair lawyer here, But do you feel that the prosecution...
For months, rumors swirled, allegations grew louder, and evidence mounted until everything led to this pivotal moment where Diddy, once the untouchable mogul who embodied power, money, and luxury in hip-hop, now sat at the mercy of the court. From the very start, the world had been captivated. Every headline, every leak, every whispered testimony turning his downfall into a public spectacle that unfolded before cameras and reporters hungry for details. He had fought to deny the accusations and resist the tide. But when the judge finally spoke, the devastating sentence delivered was so crushing it stripped away the last shred of invincibility he thought he had, confirming that his nightmare was no longer speculation but a brutal reality.
Could have won this case if they structured it differently, if they called different witnesses?
That's a great question, and that's something that these prosecutors will literally be wondering for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their careers. They're going to be wondering if they'd done it differently, would the impact upon the jury and would the result have been different. The fundamental problem, I think, is that this was kind of always a round peg in a square hole. The arson, that domestic violence video that we all watched, that's horrific. All of that should have been prosecuted as state crimes in Los Angeles. That as a fundamental, starting point.
Well, they couldn't do it now. It was time barred.
No, of course, the statute is run on everything.
Yep.
But he would have been prosecuted for exactly what he did instead of predicate acts into a RICO theory. Now, RICO, as we know, was designed for essentially mafia organization, for organized crime. And the idea is simply because there's a legitimate business, like in The Godfather, they had a legitimate olive oil importing business, and that was but it was still a criminal enterprise. The real thing was the mafia. The real thing was the organized crime surrounding the Corleone family, to use an example that everybody can probably relate to. So simply because their olive oil importing business was legitimate, that's not a defense to a RICO thing. That's the current state of the law. What they did here is they took a business that was always legitimate, Bad Boy Records, that was always and the purpose is to make music and make money. Everything surrounded that, and the defense argument, which they obviously argued very effectively, was that is not a criminal enterprise. So the very first element of RICO has always been problematic from the very beginning. You and I talked about that 2 months ago when this whole thing started, and the jury. This was a sober jury that the questions were serious and direct, and they sent that note out regarding juror 25 right at the very beginning, saying, "Hey, this guy's not deliberating." And so this was a serious group, and the Mann Act, they did convict on that. So they were, by the fact that that it was unanimous, meant that they were getting along. Federal juries tend to be, in California anyway, we have. They draw our state juries off the DMV database. That's how you get jury duties from the DMV. Federally, it's based on voter rules. So it's people who are conscientious enough to actually vote, and you tend to get a more serious class of juror in federal court, which I think is interesting. So to answer your question, it's something that we could kick around for years. Sure. But I think the fundamental problem here is that it was always kind of a misfit for a RICO theory. Just like the sex trafficking, sex trafficking requires fraud, force, or coercion, right? So that essentially is the same elements of rape. So you essentially, it's transporting somebody under circumstances that equate to rape. It's something forceful, something fearful. That it just doesn't fit very well here, especially when you're talking about all these people they're orbiting him. They're all trying to advance their own career. And when the defense attorney got up and said, Cassie got $30 million as a result of her settlement, right? That was a big move.
Yeah, I wasn't sold for that personally, because I was like, the prosecution came back and they're like, she already settled. What's her incentive to come here and lie? What's her incentive to be a part of this? And that for me, but I think the messages, the conduct that arguably contradicts someone being a victim, and I know there's complicated factors between an abuser and a victim, trauma. I get it. I totally understand it.
Diddy had tried to use his money and influence as a shield, but as the case grew, it became clear that no amount of fame or fortune could stop what was coming. Prosecutors spent months meticulously building a case that painted him as a man who had crossed every line imaginable, while his defense fought desperately to protect him, yet the mounting evidence and countless voices against him tipped the balance. By the time sentencing day arrived, the world seemed to be waiting for justice, and when the judge finally spoke, his cold, deliberate words struck like iron hammers. Frozen in his seat, Diddy's eyes shifted between the judge and his attorneys as he tried to absorb the crushing details, each accusation laid out with a precision so horrifying it silenced even the most hardened observers, proving that this was about far more than the length of a prison sentence.
It's not, what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be, and who we now understand him to be, is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, and now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters, and I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate, and also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story, and frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR, so that way, you know, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know what, I am a changed person? But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused, or you know, something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they're like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul, to only then be grilled on cross-examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, you know, in the media, and then to be judged, and then go through all of that, and I walk away in some ways empty-handed. Now, that's certainly one way of looking at things, and there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way. The flip side, because remember, the scales of justice isn't just one side, there's two sides. The other side, if you will, is at what point in time does a person pay in full their price to society? And then once they've paid the price for their transgressions, at what point do you then look at that person and feel like, hey, you know, you could be a changed person. You can redeem yourself. There's things that you can do to essentially prove to us as members of the public, as clients, as customers, that, you know what, you're a changed man. And so that's the hill Diddy has to climb. Whether he climbs that hill or not remains to be seen, but it's definitely a hill that's in front of him. And some might say it's not a hill, it's a mountain.
It is a mountain for Diddy. I think it might honestly be Mount Everest. It's a large mountain for him to scale, for, I think, people to possibly forget in their conscious what we learned in this trial. And I remember when Sean Combs, you know, we've been covering this since Cassie's lawsuit, since 2023, November of that year. And I just remember thinking that there would be some type of reckoning within the hip hop community, the Black community, as far as Me Too goes, something kind of similar. And I thought, possibly, and I think maybe other people thought so too, that maybe Sean Combs was kind of that person that would, you know, bring about this kind of reckoning in the hip hop community as far as Me Too goes. But do you think that could still happen? Do you think that will still happen?
Well, I think that Diddy's trial, you know, served as a clarion call, a wake-up call, canary in the mine, so to speak, as relates to you could be as powerful, as popular, as wealthy as Diddy. I mean, keep in mind, he called himself...
The sentence that shook the room was not only defined by its length, but by the disturbing revelations that accompanied it, as the judge laid out behaviors, testimonies, and actions that dismantled the legacy Diddy had spent decades building. Each word felt like a dagger cutting through his carefully crafted image, drawing gasps from the crowd, some whispering in disbelief, others staring wide-eyed, struggling to reconcile the man before them with the punishment he now faced. His attorneys scrambled to maintain composure, one gripping the table tightly while another leaned in with frantic whispers. But Diddy's expression revealed the truth. The arrogance and smug smile that once served as his armor had vanished, replaced by a hollow look of shock, betrayal, and terror, the realization dawning that the system he thought he could outplay had finally caught up to him, and his wealth and power could no longer protect him.
His reputation's on the line here. You know, he's been doing this a long time. I bailed out Harvey Weinstein, Conor McGregor, Plaxico Burress, Cat Williams, Lawrence Taylor. So, you know, I'm not going to put my reputation or my license in jeopardy, you know, for X amount of money. To me, you know, I'm going on. I might want to turn this business over to my son one day.
Yeah, the New York Times did a profile on you called Bailing Out the Stars. How are celebrities different? How are they different from other defendants?
More demanding. When you get the phone call from the lawyer or whoever, you know, a publicist, anybody, it could happen in the middle of the night. A celebrity does not want to spend an extra minute incarcerated. And, you know, things change so drastically. But, you know, when I did Conor McGregor, you know, he surrendered. He wanted out right away. Plaxico Burress, when that happened, we were talking, and Mayor Bloomberg was involved allegedly in the situation, and Plaxico's bail went from X to X to X. And then I'm on the phone with his agent saying, hey, I need you to send me a copy of his deed for his place in Jersey. And then with Dominic Strauss-Kahn, obviously, the world basically came to a standstill because he was the IMF, you know, president, and nobody knew if he was on his way going back to Greece to lend him X amount of money to get him out of trouble. Yet we had to find him an apartment in the city. We had to get him private security. I was dealing with his ex-wife now, you know, coming in and giving me what I need to put a $5 million bail together. So, you know, they're a little more demanding, and everybody's looking to me to make that, you know, make it happen. The lawyer could get the bail, but at the end of the day, it's Ira Jettleson that's running in, putting everything together, pressure. And I work in chaos all day long. That's my life. So, you know, when it comes to chaos, that's my specialty.
You handle it well, though. You handle it quite well, given the chaos.
I have to.
Yeah.
If, you know, as I said before, if I want to, you know, have a nice home, I want my kids to go to college, I want things to happen, you know, you gotta do these things, and people rely on you.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said here, and it's important that you said it. Your reputation's on the line. So the idea of when we say, you know, nebulous, oh, you know, how can we trust a private security team? I'm happy you clarified that. I want to get really practical here, realistically. Sean Combs was released on bail. Okay, let's say he's released. He's home confinement. What exactly is he allowed to do and not to do? Is he really there's someone's going to be watching him 24/7? They're going to make sure he has no iPad, no iPhone. Can he give directions to people like associates or other people that are involved? I mean, the concern, of course, is that even if he's out and he's around people, he can still shake things up a little bit. He can still get messages out. And I guess the question is, what does it realistically look like for him? Does he sit in a room? Does he only confined to certain rooms day in and day out? Is he constantly watched on tape and all of his electronic devices are searched on him constantly? I mean, what does it look like?
Well, again, it's really up to the restrictions of the court.
Sure.
I mean, I have people out right now that are on ankle bracelets, and you know, they can't go, you know, 400 feet. They can go 800 feet. They can go, you know, wherever, depending on what the restrictions are. In Puffy's case, the way we were putting it to the judge and to the Southern District was, we were going to have a call log, so you could see who his calls were making. We were going to try to take away his Wi-Fi and filming, which did a lot easier. We would have limited the people that would come see. So at the end of the day, you know, we had cameras inside the apartment that we were going to do, which our people were going to put up. And we were going to all let the government be able to get into that system to see who was coming in and out. Of course, there's privacy. So, you know, we were going to make it very, very tight. Now,
in that moment, it was clear none of Diddy's wealth or influence mattered anymore, as outside the courthouse the news spread like wildfire. Crowds erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled to deliver the breaking story. Supporters wept and cried conspiracy, while critics cheered that justice had finally been served. Social media exploded instantly with hashtags. Timelines flooded with reactions ranging from outrage to celebration. Celebrities either distancing themselves, expressing shock, or even praising the ruling, making it feel as though the entire internet had been consumed by the news of Diddy's downfall. Yet inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavier and darker as the judge continued speaking, emphasizing that the sentence was not delivered lightly and that this was not about punishing celebrity but about accountability, about sending a message that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, stood above the law.
Error in the sentence. Now, assuming Combs has valid legal grounds to support any of this, I imagine he will file whatever motion he can for relief from either the verdict or the sentence. Then again, I don't know. He got a very favorable ruling. Obviously, he was convicted. He's not entirely happy with it. And his defense counsel explained that. But they also, in their press conference after the verdict, they were jubilant. They were ecstatic. And I wonder if he gets a favorable sentence, is he even going to challenge this? I mean, they seem happy.
Yeah, they seem ecstatic because the emotions that kind of ran outside of the courtroom, it was kind of double that inside the courtroom, where all the defense attorneys were hugging, they were crying. So seeing them outside in the press conference, all kind of holding hands, going up, that was just a little slice of the cake from what we all saw inside that federal courtroom. But I think it can kind of go both ways, and that's mainly because Sean Combs is still behind bars right now. The judge didn't grant him bail even after the verdict, and I think his reasoning might give us a little kind of picture into what the sentencing might possibly look like, because the judge even pointed out during his denying of Diddy's bail after his conviction, which were on counts 3 and 5, kind of talking back to what had happened in June of 2024 with Jane and the violent altercation that happened over at Jane's apartment. And so I'm thinking, if the judge is already kind of on his mind about the whole domestic violence aspect and the physical violence that was exuded from the defendant, even just last year, I think it's possible maybe the judge, even if he hears from the family, even if he hears from Sean Combs' friends, that it's possible it might be kind of a little bit of a tougher sentence than maybe the defense is expecting.
Well, look, I think the defense might be wanting to take advantage of this, right? Now, the judge said, even though I'm denying bail and I'm looking at the violence factor, it's not a preview of what I'm going to do for sentencing. But I think this is the opportunity for the defense to submit any kind of mitigating factors and have the probation officer speak to his friends and family and talk about the impact of this. We just interviewed Charlucci the other day. So I wonder if they're saying, you know what? They said to Sean Combs, listen, let's wait for October. Gives us more time to present our case to Judge Subramanian. And then we had the hearing. This monumental hearing.
Great.
You've been in court for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
This was what, like 7 seconds?
I think maybe even less than, I would say
What
kind
happened?
of close to 5 minutes. So get all the way down to the courthouse and like seeing everybody
Which
from
is not
the trial.
close from here. so
No,
people know.
it's not. It's not. And it was hot outside too. So
all the way downtown,
walking
yeah.
all the way down, or no, I didn't walk all the way downtown. From the subway to the walk to the courthouse.
Okay.
Get there, check in all my stuff. I would say the security check-in was longer than the actual hearing.
Okay.
So it was a remote hearing. We didn't see Sean Combs in person. We didn't see any of the attorneys on both sides. We didn't even see the judge. And so what had happened was we get inside kind of the overflow
Oh,
room.
the overflow.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so we get inside the overflow room. There's a big giant screen. It's completely black, but then you hear Sean Combs' voice being like, Mark, are you there? And so it was kind of like one of those dial-in type of hearings. And so we heard Mark Agnifalo's voice. Then all of a sudden we hear the prosecution's voice. It was Christy Slavic. She was accompanied by Emily Johnson, both who work on behalf of the government. And then all of a sudden, Mark Agnifalo was kind of like, you know what, we were able to work everything out as far as our sentencing date goes. And then the judge's clerk is like, oh, okay, so both parties agree, and then this matter is adjourned.
And that was it. I worried that's what was going to be, because when they had the letter basically working out the date, I was like, oh, what are they going to talk about? And then after that hearing is when they switched it back to October 3rd.
Yeah.
So not much there. You didn't see Sean Combs. Okay, let's talk about some other things then. First of all, big news. There's a new lawsuit that came out against Sean Combs, okay? This is pretty disgusting. You have this unidentified John Doe who claims that in September of 2020,
Prosecutors sat with grim satisfaction, their months of relentless work culminating in this victory, knowing appeals would surely follow, but recognizing that, for now, they had brought Diddy down, not by industry rivals or street whispers, but by the system itself. His breakdown was undeniable as God approached, his composure shattered, lips trembling, eyes brimming with tears, and body shaking under the crushing weight of reality. Desperately, he scanned the room for any sign of mercy or flicker of hope, but none came, and as the guards placed their hands on his shoulders, the mogul who once strutted across red carpets and commanded boardrooms was reduced to an inmate about to be led away. Cameras captured every moment, immortalizing the image of a man once larger than life now crumbling before the world.
Is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute, justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency suite that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a band-aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility, such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in? He was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then, the defense highlights, he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they've already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison. That he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, the court noted that the
Diddy's sentencing not only destroyed his personal freedom, but also shattered his empire, which had already begun to crack even before the verdict as business partners pulled out, contracts collapsed, and projects were shelved. Now, with the weight of prison time, everything fell apart. Endorsements evaporated, collaborators vanished, and artists once eager to praise him rushed to erase all ties, desperate to avoid being linked to his downfall. The empire that took decades to build collapsed in real time, one partnership, one deal, one relationship at a time, while the judge's chilling words painted the image of a man who had long hidden behind a mask of wealth, success, and charisma, masking years of darkness and unforgivable actions. The details left people shaken, whispering as they left the courtroom, struggling to reconcile the mogul they thought they knew with the reality now laid bare. Inside, as Diddy was led away in handcuffs, silence reigned. No cheers, no claps, just a heavy stillness of watching a once untouchable giant slumped, pale, broken, stripped of swagger and aura, facing the cold reality of years behind bars. Outside, chaos raged, supporters cried conspiracy, and attorneys vowed appeals, but the undeniable truth hung in the air. Diddy was going to prison. The industry itself trembled, with artists distancing their names, deals cancelled, and projects frozen, turning what was once a legacy into a cautionary tale that marked the end of an era. His downfall was more than personal. It was a seismic cultural shift, a nightmare unfolding before the world, as a man who once symbolized ambition and the dream of rising from nothing to everything was revealed as a cautionary story of power, corruption, and consequences. The look on his face as a judge read the sentence will haunt the public for years, not just as the expression of a man going to prison, but of someone realizing that everything he had built, fought for, and believed made him invincible had crumbled in front of the world. No matter how many appeals are filed, no matter what his supporters claim, no matter how many conspiracies are whispered, the truth is set in stone. Sean Diddy Combs had been sentenced, his empire collapsed, his legacy shattered, and his worst nightmare finally come to life.